Hello, my name is Linda Chuchill. I'm a local marriage and family therapist. I've had a lot of experience facilitating bereavement support groups over the years. Today's topic is, how am I feeling? Losing a loved one due to death is among the most painful experiences we'll ever have in life. It is natural and normal to go through what some call a roller coaster of emotions. Some people even think they're crazy. They've never felt such an array of emotions in their lives. I've heard bereavement support group participants describe many feelings associated with their loss. Sadness is probably the most prevalent. Emptiness, anger, guilt, anxiety, and much more. All very normal and human. Now, the many emotions associated with grief reveals just how the mind and body naturally react to loss. So the more significant the loss, or rather the more significant the attachment to the deceased, probably the more painful the feelings. Now, in order to better understand the nature of grief, it helps to know some of its features. And by the way, our emotional experiences don't fall into neat and tidy categories or stages. Everyone's grief is different, and everyone grieves in their own way. And yet we have learned that there are various hallmarks in our grieving process. Most of the time, we're doing more than one thing at once. Most of the time, we're adjusting to the pain of the loss while reorienting ourselves to our new normal. In other words, we might be very, very sad, and yet we still have to take out the trash. Yeah, life's practicalities push us forward. So a common feeling actually associated with the onset of the grief experience is denial. Now, this is especially prevalent when we know that a loved one is going to die soon, but we don't want to face or accept it. We avoid talking about it, mostly because we're just not ready. That's all denial really is. So I'm just not ready. It's that dimension of grief that is not just not ready, but unable to grapple with the enormity of the loss. It's too hard to believe, it's too big, and it's too much all at once. This is a time for real compassion. Another common aspect of grief is anger. Now, anger is that emotion that tells us that we don't like what happened or how it happened, and that's putting it mildly. When we are deprived or denied of something or someone against our wishes, we naturally experience anger. Anger happens when our hopes, expectations, dreams, even needs are not met. Anger is natural and human. It's neither good nor bad, actually. It's just an emotion, like all of our emotions. We don't judge happy, we don't judge glad, neither should we judge any other emotion. Now, what we can judge is behavior. We can judge behavior, but not emotion. So, for example, on a bad day, you might be tempted to lash out at someone. Your anger is not the issue here. Your lashing out behavior is the problem. It's okay to be angry. It's just not okay to hurt people. Guilt actually is very common as well. Now, I frame guilt as a dimension of love. In fact, because grief and love are already two sides of the same coin, many feelings we have are connected to that love. Now, if we didn't love, we wouldn't grieve. But most of us are going to love, so we are going to grieve. Now, I recall a recently widowed woman who couldn't shake her guilt. She shared that her late husband had died of cancer just a few months after the diagnosis. And apparently he was the type of person who just didn't go to doctors. Big strapping man, didn't need doctors, refused to see doctors. But then one day he grudgingly accepted that he needed medical help. I guess the symptoms were that bad. And anyway, he died of cancer not long after that diagnosis, maybe a few months. This woman had a lot of grief because, not grief, all grief, yes, but also guilt, because in her sense, to her mind, she should have forced him to get to a doctor. She should have insisted that he go for his annual checkup, or dragged him to the car, drove him there. She felt so responsible for not doing something, anything, to get him the medical help sooner than later. And as she continued to process this guilt, it came to her that her guilt was a manifestation of her love. It was a way of saying, my darling, I would have done anything to keep you around. I wish I would have done anything to keep you around. Now, we tend to judge emotions, or many people do, or even have feelings about the feelings. I don't want this feeling. I'm bad for feeling this way. I shouldn't feel this way. I should be over it by now. I wish I could teleport myself into the future and be done with this. It's unfortunate that we have such an uncomfortable relationship with our emotional states. I wonder what it would be like if we could learn to accept all of our feelings the way they are, just as they are, accepting them with kindness and perhaps even compassion. I do wonder if they would feel less burdensome and pass through us more quickly if we didn't block their pathway. In the words of David Kessler, emotions need motion. Now, it's important to learn to handle our emotions constructively, obviously not destructively. And so anger and sadness are the many emotions which we grapple with. I like the RAIN acronym by Dr. Tara Brach. R stands for recognize. It's important to recognize what we're feeling, to name it. Might say, I am angry. A stands for allow. I allow this feeling of anger to exist inside of me. It's there for a reason. Of course I'm angry. Someone I love was taken from me. I stands for investigate with kindness and compassion. What is my anger telling me? My anger is telling me that I am protesting against this terrible event. My anger is telling me that I have loved and I have lost and I don't like it. N stands for nurture with compassion. I will be with my anger. It has a right to be there. I'll make room for it and I will let it move through me as I move through it. So we can use Dr. Tara Brach's RAIN acronym with all of our emotions in order to become better friends with ourselves. A supervisor, a brilliant former supervisor of mine once said to me, the most important relationship we'll ever have is with ourselves. Yeah, we're with ourselves a lot. It would be nice to cultivate a nice relationship with ourselves. For many people, sadness is the prevalent emotion associated with loss and grief. Sadness is truly a difficult emotion to be with. Many people, will try to avoid sadness by analyzing their grief experience, but trying not to feel it. Analysis does keep people in a state of avoidance. But grief is to be felt instead of analyzed. I also like the phrase that, what did David Kessler say? If you have 1,000 tears, don't stop at 500. Sadness is meant to flow, meant to flow. I recall meeting with a senior widower. It might have been 5 months after his late wife had died. He said that he had arranged a counseling appointment because his adult children thought that he was mentally ill because he was still so sad. And I said to him, you're not sick, you're sad. And sadness is not pathology. Sadness is normal when someone you love dies. Frankly, I was wondering how the kids were feeling, the adult kids were feeling. They must have been sad too. Now, grief may also feel like anxiety. Some people ask, what if I always feel this way? What if this pain is my permanent new normal? Which, by the way, the pain does subside. The grief remains because that loved one will always be gone from you. But the pain will not be as acute as it is in the first couple of years or so. But anyway, anytime you hear a scary story starting with what if this, what if that, you're usually in the land called anxiety. Anticipatory grief tends to produce anxiety as well. Our mind goes to worst case scenarios. I know people who tell me that they keep thinking about more people dying and how much they worry about losses still to come. Or they start worrying, say if someone's just late for dinner, they imagine, oh my word, were they in a car crash? What happened? So one antidote to that type of anxiety is to come to the present moment, to come to the present moment, to be in the now. We can use our senses, our breath, our body to be in touch with now. The sky is blue, the trees are green, the birds are singing. Just be grounded in the now. Another antidote to that kind of anxiety is to balance worst case scenarios with best case scenarios. For example, what if I lose a loved one because of this pandemic? Well, that can be balanced by there's a good chance that if we follow the safety protocols, we'll be fine. And by the way, I can't help but speak to the fact that we are still, as I speak, in a lockdown with pandemic restrictions. And of course, we've all heard heartbreaking stories about people who've lost their loved ones because their loved ones had to remain isolated. There could be no contact with that person or very nominal contact with loved ones. And I can't think of anything more heartbreaking than to lose a loved one that I couldn't be with in person. I have been with loved ones in their dying process, at their deathbed, you might say. And it's been one of the most meaningful experiences I've ever had in my life. To be deprived that, to me, just as another layer of grief upon grief upon grief. So anticipatory grief is a little bit like time travel into the future, and no one can predict the future. So once again, present moment thinking can be very helpful. Another feeling associated with grief, surprisingly, is love. I once read about a bereavement group participant who said that her grief felt like love with no place to go. Can you relate to that? I can relate to that. Love with no place to go. So you can still have feelings of love for the deceased. And I would argue that this is a clue to where our grief journey is meant to take us, to that place where we develop that capacity to remember with more love than pain. That means that we have learned to live with that loved one in memory. We have learned to shape their legacy. Now we do our best healing in a no judgment zone. The practice of acceptance is also that part of grief where we have learned to live with our altered circumstances. Now, I'm not saying that when we reach that place of acceptance, and by the way, it's not the end of it, because we can feel very accepting one day and just have a grief burst the next day. Remember, our healing process is not even sequential, neat and tidy set of stages. It's not like that for us humans. But anyway, when we are at that place of acceptance, some hallmarks of that place is we still don't like what happened. We'll never like the fact that our loved one died. That's a no-brainer. But we have learned to just live with that reality. We're ready to live again. We're ready to make the best of our lives. We're ready to live full lives, life beyond death, you might say, life beyond loss. Now, as you may surmise, there's power in acceptance. I'm going to get back to my gardening. I'm going to rejoin my groups. I'm going to take care of my home. Um, there are so many ways to rejoin life with acceptance of the loss. Now, feelings of acceptance doesn't mean one isn't going to get angry from time to time or sad about the loss. We're human. We're going to feel things. When we grieve our losses, it might feel like a lot is out of our control, perhaps even our emotions. Again, emotions need motion. The emotions need to flow. And if we're gentle with our grief tends to be gentle with us. And also, we can also get in touch with that which is within our control. There are a number of things within our control. Our values, our work ethic, our nutritional practices, our hobbies, our fitness practices, our connections with loved ones, and more. Much is within our control. Of course, nowadays, there's lots that is not within our control. We're going through a pandemic, and of course, we can't predict when this thing is going to end. We know that the end is in sight, just we don't have a date. So our best strategy is to do the best we can in controlling our own actions and behaviors. Self-compassion, by the way, is another way to apply comfort at this time. I'm not going to go into any detail about self-compassion, except to say you can Google it. The term was coined and developed by an American psychologist, Dr. Kristen Neff, and her website, full of goodies, is selfcompassion.org. Lots of good things on that topic. So many therapists and helpers of all kinds encourage us to find meaning and connection in these times. Grief can be so very lonely, and that's why some people choose loss and grief, and also called bereavement support groups. Connecting with others in a no judgment zone can be enormously helpful, very comforting, very, very supportive. And also, when we can feel our feelings and remove the judgment, we actually recover faster because we've kind of taken away the blockages. Now, for some people, getting in touch with values can be very helpful because it avoids sinking into self-pity. A little bit of self-pity makes sense when we're going through, I don't know if I like the word pity, I like the word compassion better. Self-compassion better than self-pity. Living into values. This could be especially true for people who've got other people depending on them. And so, how do we muster the strength to do well in a time of suffering and sorrow? The strength to be good parents or good grandparents or just good people, maybe good colleagues, good coworkers. How do we muster the strength to rise when we feel flattened by grief? Values can help us with that. We can still model and embody a healthy grief while living into our values. So values that guide our choices and decisions. To know our values can help us through good times and bad. So for example, if you're committed to the value of a healthy family, that'll probably keep you going even when you don't feel like it. You'll still get up and make breakfast if that's what your role is in your home. Even during a time of loss and grief, we can still engage with that which makes us feel good, healthy, and energized. It does no one any good if you refuse to treat yourself with kindness. So take a moment to think about what does give you energy and a sense of renewal. I've asked people, and I've gotten some answers such as walking in nature when weather permits. For a lot of people, getting into nature can really be a soothing kind of balm for their pain and suffering. Some people, baking, cooking, believe it or not, for those with the energy to do that, that's probably maybe a little later on in the grief process, not usually right away. For some people, it's meditating, yoga. There's even a practice called grief yoga. I think I'm going to have some websites listed with this presentation, and I'll include the grief yoga because for some people, well, and by the way, emotions are in the body. So some grief yoga is a way to sort of be in relation with the emotions in a way that's helpful and restorative. For a lot of people, talking with people they trust is enormously beneficial. By the way, don't underestimate the value of basic health practices. Eat well, good food, good things that are good for you, a bit of exercise, uh, good sleeps, uh, plenty of water, all that basic thing, that basic stuff that most of us know, um, will help us feel a lot better. For example, if we're sleep deprived, we're going to feel irritable and depressed. So we need to figure out a way to take as good care of ourselves as we possibly can. And if you need support for this, don't hesitate to reach out to your doctor or others that you trust. Now, as I said earlier, there are many websites devoted to healing grief, and I've listed a few. I hope they prove helpful as you feel your way through the grieving process.